Hi guys, this is PJ here. Hope everybody's doing good this morning. Just gonna read this article before I get ready for work. It's from Railfan and Railroad, and it's the feature article. It's Deepwater Revival from the Norfolk Southern Railroad by Scott Lowe's, who's also the photographer for the article. So here goes. My great aunt grew up in the West Virginia mountain town of Mullins, nestled at the base of the Allegheny Plateau, 20 miles southwest of Beckley. As a girl, she recalls old-time mountain revivals when churches would try to rekindle the flame in their congregations. The event was often a week-long festivity spanning 2 Sunday services. Tents were set up and tables were spread with every home-cooked delicacy imaginable. Traveling ministers from out of town would give fire and brimstone sermons into the wee hours of every night while gospel music echoed up and down the valleys. Over 40 years later, Mullins is a sleepy mountain town that is rarely shaken by the likes of fire and brimstone revivals. The Virginian Railway, which employed my great-aunt's father and brought about his death, is no longer in existence. Merged into the Norfolk and Western in 1959, which was itself merged into Norfolk Southern in 1982. The massive shops and car barn that once maintained the Virginians' great fleet of steam, diesel, and electric locomotives, and were once the largest employer in Mullins, have been silent for many years. Norfolk Southern still maintains a modest terminal just south of town, but Elmore Yard is only a shadow of its former self. Yet at the north end of town, crossing flashes come to life, and 6 big thoroughbred GEs rumble out of town with an empty hopper train, U-91, bound for Deepwater, West Virginia, on the former Virginian main line. So, what exactly does a 100-car coal train have in common with a traveling minister? In this case, more than you might think. New life on a sleepy line. Traveling revival ministers brought new life to sleepy congregations, stirring the church to renewed purpose and greater activity. That U-91 heading out of town definitely signifies a renewed purpose and increased activity. In the late 1990s, the ex-Virginian main line between Deepwater and Mullins easily qualified as a sleepy railroad. On a good week, 2 turns might operate from Elmore up to the connections with CSX and Conrail at Deepwater. But June 1st, 1999, brought revival to those sleepy rails. Actually, the rails themselves did not see very much of the revival, as a prelude of things to come with the Conrail merger. The jointed rail was replaced with continuous welded steel in 1998. In the merger, Norfolk Southern acquired Conrail's ex-New York Central, West Virginia secondary, and with it came access to several coal mines around Gauley Bridge and Summersville. Conrail had hauled that coal down the Kanawha River across the Ohio and into Columbus, but NS had different ideas for that southern West Virginia bituminous. At the southern end of the state, the Pocahontas Division, Pokey Mainline, has earned its keep year in and year out as the main artery for Norfolk Southern coal. With so many routes and customers already established, it made good business sense to get the coal from the West Virginia secondary mines down to the Pokey main as quickly as possible. The former Virginian main line was the natural choice. Any other routing would involve a circuitous trip or a hefty trackage rights agreement with NS's primary competitor, CSX. The Princeton Deepwater District, as the line is called in NS timetables, had its revival and found renewed purpose. Increased activity followed right away, with one or two trains operating in each direction daily. Operations. From the completion of the Deepwater Railroad in the late 1800s, moving coal heavy trains between Deepwater and Mullins has never been easy. New ties and ribbon rail have eliminated slow orders and eased maintenance burdens, but getting a 100-car coal train over Oak Hill and down to Mullins is still a difficult task. Since the Conrail merger, operating crew districts have changed little. Deepwater turns are still called out of the Elmore Yard office to take empty hoppers north, timetable west. Empty trains leave the yard looking grossly overpowered, typically with 6 big motors on the head end. Don't even think of calling locomotive units down here. Much of the Virginian was once electrified, and that heritage is still wired deep in these parts. Norfolk Southern uses any and all power available for coal service, but prefers its fleet of GE-9s. Only a couple of big 6-axles will be needed for the northbound trip, but the reason for the others will soon become apparent. Upon arrival in Deepwater, it is common for a loaded mine run to be waiting across the Kanawha River in the small yard at Alloy. West Virginia secondary mine runs are still based out of Dickinson Yard, a few miles east of Charleston. There are few mines in the area, but 2 provide the lion's share of the tonnage. Several miles north of Golly Bridge, at the small hamlet of Belva, the tracks the mine split. One line goes north on the former Vaughan Railroad to Fuller, a large strip mine served jointly by CSX and NS. The CSX line runs up the opposite bank of the Golly River to Belva, where it crosses the river and is joined by the NS line for the remainder of the trip to the mine. Fuller typically loads several trains each week for both NS and CSX. East of the junction, at Belva, NS trains run on former Nicholas, Fayette, and Greenbrier tracks, a former logging railroad owned and operated jointly by the Chesapeake and Ohio and NYC. Later, CSX and Conrail. As coal mines along the NF and G played out, the railroad was split up, with the eastern portion going to CSX and Conrail getting the western end of the system. The lines once joined at Peters Junction, but the connection along the Golly River was severed in the early 1990s. A few miles beyond the junction, Terry Eagle Mine provides occasional coal traffic for NS, but most trains continue on the end of the line at High Power Mountain. This new mine features a balloon track and flood loader capable of filling a 100-car train in just a few hours. Power Mountain typically loads 1 train per day, but like Fuller, has the capacity to do more as the coal market warrants. Back at Deepwater, that empty train has stopped on the big bridge over the Kanawha River. If no loaded train is waiting at Alloy, empty trains will either tie down in the small yard and get a taxi or continue on to Dickinson. Usually, though, a loaded train is waiting. The track arrangement at Alloy is essentially a switchback for trains moving between the ex-VGN and the mines. Since both the empty and loaded trains have to change directions, several switching moves are required to properly position the power. That task is complicated by the tight confines of the small yard, and it usually takes a couple hours for the two crews to swap trains. When the coal dust has settled and the switching is complete, the empty train will have three motors on what used to be its rear end, while the loaded train will have three motors fore and three more aft. There is a stiff climb from the Kanawha River all the way to Oak Hill Summit. The grade tops out around 2%, and NS still uses manned pushers to get loaded trains over the road. If you haven't caught on to the local parlance yet, those motors shoving on the rear are not known as helpers in this neck of the woods. After the loaded train crosses the bridge, it immediately hops over CS6's ex-CNO main line and State Highway 61. It then plunges into a short tunnel and emerges into the Loop Creek Valley from one of the most demanding parts of the climb. The tracks wind along Loop Creek on sharp curves and a stiff grade, crossing the creek several times and going through the second tunnel. Flange greasers ease wear on the rail, but do little to improve traction. Even with 2,400 horses urging the tonnage south, the train will be lucky to make 15 miles per hour, until the grade flattens out slightly near Robson. After a few miles of moderate climbing, the grade ramps up again for the rest of the way to the summit at Oak Hill Junction. From there, the line follows a sawtooth profile to Jenny Gap before dropping downhill the rest of the way to Mullins. The crew train handling skills are tested to the limit, often switching from full throttle directly to full dynamic braking. Upon arrival in Elmore Yard, the crew of the Deepwater turn will take their well-deserved rest, and a new crew will take the train east. But the fight with gravity is far from over. And that's it for part one of this article about the Deepwater Revival. I'll see you guys tomorrow for part two. Take care. Have a good day.